This is John Nugent.
I'm Sam Long.
And I'm Ron Peters.
Welcome to the After Class Podcast.
Because the best conversations happen after class.
Thanks for joining us in another episode of the After Class Podcast. We're glad to have you along. By the time this episode drops, the three of us will be in wonderfully beautiful and warm San Antonio, Texas.
Yes, we will.
Attending the Society of Biblical Literature Conference, our annual pilgrimage to the Mecca of biblical studies.
Yeah.
Biblical nerddom.
Yeah.
Not necessarily San Antonio, but
Correct.
the conference.
The conference itself. Which 2 times in San Antonio in 3 years, is that right?
Yeah, it
This
was
is-
pretty recently.
San Antonio, Denver, San Antonio?
Yeah.
This will be our third time, right?
Yep. Our third time.
Your third, my second.
Yep.
Gotcha.
But San Antonio is just a beautiful city. You know, the river walk is phenomenal. If you've never been down there, I highly recommend it because it's a beautiful river walk. It's really long. You've got shops and restaurants, and they keep it well decorated. And at night, the lighting they have over
That's pretty cool.
Oh, yeah.
is really nice. So I'm excited to go to San Antonio, and it's going to be warm. It's going to be high 70s while we're there. So
I'm not excited about flying out early in the morning, but that's the way it goes.
yeah, we have to leave.
Of course, doesn't matter. No one cares about my sleep schedule, but I'll be up. It'll be fine.
Well, we have to leave here at 5:15.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not excited about 2 planes.
We do have a, yeah,
Yeah. We're
that's the way it goes.
switching over in Chicago. I've never flown through Chicago, but people always grumble and complain about it. So I'm kind of curious as to what that's going to be
Yeah.
like.
This will be the first time in a very long time I've had a double flight. Like, for me and my back, it's just like one flight. Like, I can get through one flight with all the waiting in line and the sitting in those uncomfortable seats and being crammed in there, and then doing it again is like a formula for disaster. So we'll see how my back survives this.
Well, it's a puddle jumper to Chicago. I mean,
Yeah.
it's literally an hour flight.
8 minutes, actually.
Well, I mean, we get up high enough to coast, and immediately we're descending back
Right.
into Chicago. So it's really short.
Lots of walking in airports.
Love that so much.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll bring back a report, perhaps, of what we learned in.
Yeah, and we always do. Like, there are things
Yeah.
we've learned that
Yeah.
we want to share with you all, things we took away from it. But our next episode will actually not be that report, because the next episode we're going to try to record in San Antonio. Is that correct?
Well, there was a discussion about that. We never came to any conclusions.
Yeah, I thought
I mean,
we did. I thought we were going to.
I thought we were as well because we
Yeah,
got to bring the snowball microphone and be
All
ready
right.
to go.
So the quality, the sound quality might be lesser on the next episode because of that, but
Yeah.
we'll do what we can.
Recording from the road.
Yeah,
So-
but the one after that, that'll be our kind of recap of how the trip went.
There you go.
2 episodes from now.
All right. Anything else?
I guess
Nope.
it.
All right.
I got nothing else.
Well, in previous episodes, the last 2, to be specific, we talked about kind of advice for new Christians. What might you try to do and try to accomplish? And then we talked about discipleship and mentoring, and kind of go hand in hand to these sorts of things. And we were sitting around about an hour ago at the lunch table, like, what are we talking about today? Because we didn't know. We didn't really want to start a new series. We weren't prepared to do a whole lot. So we kind of were going around the table, and there were different ideas. The president suggested that we talk about Gen Z slang. We're not doing that.
Sorry, Frank.
We don't know any, and it would be awful.
It would be awful.
But a student is like, who actually listens, which is pleasing. He said, "Why don't you talk about evangelism?" Because kind of like, we talked about what it means to be a new Christian, what it means to disciple someone, but also like, how do you make more Christians? And we were kind of intrigued by that, and so we're going to give that a go. We're going to talk about evangelism, but we're not starting with Matthew 28. We're starting with the Old Testament, and we're going to kind of work through, I think, some passages, and because I think it's important to see, to have in mind how the Israelites were supposed to do evangelism, because they were. They weren't just supposed to sort of be there and be insular and, to the exclusion of the rest of the world. It's quite the opposite, which we'll find. And so think about them as a model and then see how that continues as we go through in the New Testament, which, of course, will not be one episode.
Right.
It'll be multiple episodes, but we'll start in the Old Testament.
And let's give credit to the student. That was
I
Luke.
forgot to name him by name. Luke Carnahan.
Yep.
Kudos, my man.
And thanks for listening, Luke. Really appreciate it.
And I do want to give props to Todd Hillsman
Okay.
for putting out a topic that I feel really compelled to do an episode on. And that is,
You're not going to share it yet, are you? Oh, I guess so.
we can share the name of it.
All right.
Shamgar.
And so for those of you who are like, I have no idea what that means, now's your homework. Find out what Shamgar or who Shamgar is in the Old Testament.
There will be a full episode on Shamgar in the future.
It's going to be very exciting.
Yep.
There's a lot of good stuff to talk about.
Yep. So looking forward to it.
Yeah. So before we jump in, I just thought I'd sort of pose a question to you all. What has been your experience with evangelism? Either doing it or it being done to you or what you've been taught over the years? What have you done?
Whenever I think evangelism, I think back many, many years ago. This is like 20, 25 years ago, where I was talking with some folks at a church where I used to work, and they were talking about going out and doing street evangelism.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the questions I asked was, so, once they pray with you on this street corner, what happens next? And I remember this gal got like quiet. I'm like, are they going to church? Is anything happening there? And she's like, well, it's not our job to disciple them. It's just to get them saved. And I was struck by that. And I've never forgotten that conversation because it sounded off, to say the least. Like, it's not our job. I guess we just want to get them into heaven or whatever they think was happening there. But I remember this person being very, very offended by my line of questioning. And that was a formative experience for me because I can't think of evangelism in terms of just getting people to say a prayer.
Sure.
Evangelism is helping people to become lifetime disciples of Jesus. And that approach to evangelism didn't seem to accomplish that task.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, my experience has been quite diverse. I mean, it's been a lot of years as a Christian in a lot of different church contexts, and churches trying all sorts of different strategies. And so, I've been a part of, evangelistic groups that just show up in random places and start giving your testimony and see who shows up to listen. I've been a part of those and seen some interesting results. Also, just random scenario evangelism, like when I was laid up in bed in a hospital and someone else was laid up in a hospital bed next to me, just tried to get a conversation up about Jesus and faith, and had evangelism encounters like that have borne some really good fruit. But then some more kind of church intentional programming, like this week I want everyone to kind of think of someone in your life and then go talk to them. Evangelism, done some of that. I'm kind of for all forms of evangelism.
Mm-hmm.
Like Ron, I kind of share the what's next step. Like I often assume some responsibility that there's got to be something next.
Yeah.
But to get a conversation going with people about the gospel and faith, it's hard to think of methods that would be unusable.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I've tried to communicate that to people because there are a lot of people who think that you're not evangelizing unless you have a conversation about Jesus. I'm like, yes, we want to have those conversations. That is a part of evangelism. But just having an encounter with somebody where you're representing Jesus in a positive way, you're just being a light in that person's life. You might not see the fruit from that situation, but you've played a role in drawing that person to Jesus, so that we see every moment of our lives and every interaction we have, especially with non-believers, as an evangelistic moment. Because you may not be the one to sort of hear that decision being made, but you've played a role in drawing that person to Jesus. Or, just to spin another way, you could be the one that pushes them away, Mm-hmm. I don't want to weigh people out with too much fear or anything like that, but merely to take our everyday experiences seriously enough to know that in everything I do, I'm representing Jesus. And I want to represent him well.
And I think at church, another couple that we've done is like service evangelism, like go out there and meet a concrete need. And while you're there, try to find people to talk to about Jesus, while serving them, try to get the conversation. And one other one that is kind of unique is that our church decided we're going to launch Bible studies in our neighborhood. Like, it's just a mini series on going going through the Bible story and just sharing the story. It's kind of a concise beginning and end point. So we're not kind of asking them to commit, and then just invited our neighbors, kind of sent flyers all around the neighborhood, inviting people to come. And so we've done that kind of evangelism as well. And that actually bore some pretty concrete fruit as well.
Nice. Yeah. Okay.
How about you?
I remember learning the Roman road and the whole graph of the two, the cliffs and the valley
The
and the
gap
cross,
chart.
and as the tool to sort of talk about the gospel story to people. But I also remember when I was a youth minister in Tennessee, there was a conference called Dare to Share. And it was a weekend conference where Friday night and Saturday morning, they would teach you all the tools you needed to evangelize. And then they let the kids loose in Johnson City, Tennessee, going place to place, cold calling, cold evangelizing people. And they came back at the evening like for a celebration thing. I don't know. I won't say I regret now taking my kids to it. I just like you said, like I get the impetus, the idea of like let's train our kids, let's give them tools. But the whole cold calling is just, I don't know. It rubs me the wrong way. Yeah. Like you're trying to talk about a relationship with the Lord your Lord and Savior with someone you don't have a relationship with. It's just a weird thing for me. And I understand if it like naturally moves into that, but the knock on the door like, hey, do you know Jesus? If not, let me talk. Like, I don't know. It's like selling Kirby's. I just don't. It's just not the way to go for me. So anyway, that was just sort of one time in my life that happened. So with that in mind, the goal of this series is to talk about, I think, maybe how we as Christians can do it well. But in order to get there, as I said, we're going to start at the beginning. And the very beginning, I think the first 11 chapters of Genesis kind of lay out why we need evangelism at all. Right. And the simple answer is sin, right? Where sin has run rampant, violence is increasing, and something has to be done about humanity's proclivity to sin. God, tried flooding sin out of the world, but hearts weren't changed. And so God decides to do something else. And that something is choosing a man and a people in order to sort of bring goodness into the world in a world full of sin. And so we start with Genesis 12, a well-known character, Abram, soon to be called Abraham. So go ahead, Ron.
All right. So Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. Which becomes like the program statement for Israel. God's going to build this nation, and why? Why am I going to build this nation? And so, beginning verse 1, it says, Now the Lord said to Abram, Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you, all the families of earth shall be blessed. And so what strikes me on that are two things. God says to Israel, his descendants, I'm going to bless them. And it's like, yay, we're going to be blessed by God. That's an exciting thing to think about. I love this idea of being blessed by God. But it's so that you can be a blessing. And it's not just being a blessing to your neighbors, which is part of it. Israelites are supposed to be a blessing to fellow Israelites. But all the nations on earth are to be blessed through Israel. And so God is going to use this group of people to reach the rest of humanity. Okay, humanity's going off the rails. Nobody's listening to the Creator. They're going their own way, which, as you said, Sam, results in an increasing death spiral of violence as well as other forms of sin. And God's like, I want to get people back to the original plan I was thinking of when I created the earth. And guess what, Israel? You're going to play a key role in that.
Yeah, this was the passage where I first started thinking about the Old Testament as caring about evangelism.
Yeah,
right.
This
was because I didn't, honestly, growing up, I just didn't think the Old Testament cared about it at all. Like that started in the New Testament with the Great Commission. That's when evangelism started. And so this passage, in college was explained to me as, no, this is kind of the mandate that sets up the whole Bible story of the church in, Israel, and then the church and its relationship to the wider world. But then I went to seminary, and I had a professor there that it seemed like, he thought that was a misuse of this passage.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you had a similar experience, Sam, where they kind of made much of this is the word for, be a blessing to the nations is it's a reflexive, right? Like a hithpael.
Mm-hmm.
Like through you, the nations will bless themselves.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of that?
Yep.
And so I actually heard that explained as a way of saying, so this isn't really about us being proactive about trying to be a blessing to others. It's really God's going to bless us, and other people around us are going to kind of like, I don't know, milk a blessing out of us.
Trickle down blessing. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think about that? Have you heard that? What do you think about that?
I get what they're saying, using grammar, but that like it's this idea of so for me the idea of election, which often is in terms of like Reformed circles, but election in the Bible is for God chooses people for a mission.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not just I choose you period. And if other people benefit, okay, that's nice. No, it's like I'm choosing you for more than that. Not just to, and anyway, gotten the sideline, sidetracked with like Israel and all the rest of modern day. Like they weren't chosen just to be chosen. They're chosen because God's using them to do something. And I would say that's correct. It's not all explained here.
Right.
And there are multiple, what we might call calling covenantal passages with Abraham in the next few chapters that I think expand on it a little bit more. And so on the one hand, you could say if this was all we had, then maybe they would have a case. But I think there's just so much more that happens in the next 6 to 8 chapters that reminds us like, oh no, there's more going on. And so I wouldn't just limit it to, I don't know, was it like a contaminant blessing? I don't even know what that would look like.
Like whatever it is, it's passive.
Yeah.
It's just like you go be great people and let others, benefit from you or take from you what they find helpful and then use it to bless themselves almost. Right. But your role is passive.
Yeah.
But I agree with you, and I think especially how you introduced this passage, even like this passage didn't occur in a vacuum. It follows from Genesis 1 through 11, which is a global crisis of rampant society-wide social structures, individual wickedness, sin, violence. And God promises in the flood, after the flood with the rainbow, I'm never going to do this again.
Right.
Which sets up, well, then, God, what are you going to do about the violence of the world and the wickedness and the sin of the world and all of its negative consequences? Next chapter, he calls Abraham. Yep. So it's kind of like that context says, like, this calling is to address this problem.
Right.
And why set apart a people who, and tell them you're the chosen people that I'm using in response to this global crisis, but you don't really have to do anything or you don't have a proactive function. It doesn't make sense of even where Genesis started, let alone where the story goes forward and culminates in the Great Commission and so forth. Yeah.
Well, and even in terms of like, where they're going to be, he's going to give this land to them. Like, how does positioning them in that little strip of land there position them to be a blessing to the nations? Like, what's the payoff there for like this little teeny strip of land? I think part of it, I don't think it's full explanation, but part of it is this is not an empire place, but the empires pass through here all the time. You have caravans following these 2 major roads that pass through there. Sometimes armies pass through there. It's not like you're not going to interact with the nations in this little out-of-the-way strip of land. Everybody goes through there. Egypt, Babylon, the Hittite empires. They're gonna see you, and they're gonna go, those Israelites are weird. They just don't do things like we do it. But dang, somehow that really works, and they look good. And so, God positions them geographically to have this impact on the nations around them.
Yeah. And at least, when you think about what do we get out of this passage for evangelism, I mean, the first thing is it's through a set-apart people.
Right.
Like Abraham has to leave his old life behind, his old kinship connections behind, his old geography behind to go somewhere so that his descendants can be shaped in such a way that they can be a blessing to the nation. So right off the bat, evangelism is connected to the life together of a people.
Yeah.
And a life that is blessed by God. Like God is blessing them. And it's out of that blessing of this collective, it's from that their impact on the nations comes.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. I mean, he's moving like 2 or 3 countries or regions away from home, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, this isn't just hey, be a cool person where you live. Like, no, we're going to a whole different place, a place where, like you mentioned, it's like a crossroads where everyone's going to go through here, and it's just setting up to do something, not just be, right?
Yeah.
And yes, there's going to be more texts that are going to explain what that looks like, but for now, it's just Moses. Yeah, moving forward to the next passage. But Abraham is like, okay, I guess I don't get it all, but that's okay. We'll do this thing, and we'll see what you're going to do from it. And I think that the blessing, we don't know what the blessing is yet, but there's going to be for the world.
Yeah, it's funny. Hardly anybody wants to live there, but everybody passes through there.
Yeah.
There's something that speaks to evangelism, even in that. No, people live there and then they move out really fast. It's very transitory in terms of that.
It's like the anti-Ohio. No one wants to live there, but we have to pass through it.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of Moses, that you were anxious to get there. Our next passage is Exodus 19. And this is one that's kind of strategic in the narrative because, we know that Abraham obeyed God, from Genesis 12 and left his land and went to the land that God showed him. And then he had descendants who had descendants who had descendants who ended up in Egypt, who ended up enslaved. But they were numerous people, right? And God delivers them from Egypt. And really, we have God's first instructions to his people through Moses that are given to us in chapter 19. I think I'll start in verse 3. So then Moses went up to God. The Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell the Israelites, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession out of all the peoples. Indeed, the whole earth is mine, but you shall be for me a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the Israelites."
So here is the actual why they were elected, right? This is the mission.
Yep.
Yeah.
And this idea of I'm sure we've talked about this multiple times. This is a key verses for the entire Old Testament and moving into the New Testament. But the idea of priestly kingdom and holy nation. So the holiness, the set apartness is going to continue. You're going to a different place. You're going to be doing some things that are going to make you different than everyone else. And the goal of it is to be this kingdom where you're priests, you're intercessors, you are bringing people before me, right? That's your goal, is to reflect and help facilitate people's interaction with me, which may be a shortened definition of a priest, right? And so, that's their mission. That's it. So how are you going to be a blessing? This is how.
Yep. And if they're a priestly kingdom, which goes beyond just the Levites who were their priests, but if every tribe, all 12 tribes and everybody in those tribes are priests, well, you're priests for whom? It's like, if you're all priests have to be ministering to somebody. And so you've got God on the one side, you've got you priests who are the mediators in the middle. Who are you mediating with? And that's got to be the rest of the world. You have to see your role as mediating for these people, for the Egyptians and the Babylonians, the people living around you, nearby and far away, and to see that you have a job for them as that mediating people. And that's a very important element of their identity. It's not God's got this little group of people that he's going to separate and build a wall around, and I'm going to bless you, and we're going to have this wonderful relationship, and all the rest of the world, we're just going to forget about it. Yeah. That is just not the plan. Israel, you've got to see yourself as playing a key role in how God is going to reach out to the rest of the world to turn them away from sin.
Yeah, so the evangelism in this passage is really the naming of them as priests.
Yeah.
Because priests don't exist for themselves.
No.
They always exist for the good of the others that are not priests, whom they are serving.
Exactly.
And we're still not given what'll it look like, right? But we know that the priests being set apart is part of this equation. We know that them being holy is a part of it. We know that it's tied to obeying God's laws and keeping his commandments. Like there's somehow this covenant he's making with them is part of their priestly calling.
Right.
That's somehow going to be good for others. And it doesn't say who the others are, but I think maybe as we go forward to the next passage, maybe we'll get a sense of what that looks like.
Yeah, I preached a sermon on this, and I used the sort of illustration of a jigsaw puzzle. And talking about, so when you do a jigsaw puzzle, what's the easiest way to do it?
Start with the corners.
Yep.
Even before that, do you think you should know what it looks like in the end?
Oh, yeah. Look at the picture.
Right.
Yeah.
If you don't have if you're just given pieces, you're like, okay. But if you actually have a picture of it, you know what it looks like, you can work forward. I feel like Abraham's here are some pieces, you got nothing, bro. Figure it out. Right. And then little by little, the Israelites begin to see, oh, okay, this is what it's going to, and this is just one more sort of step into that, because this then leads to Torah. Right, with what follows here in 20 through 23, and through Leviticus. So, this is exactly what it's supposed to look like, right? Where you have the box, okay, now we got to put it together, and that's what Torah is. It's this gift of, vision of how it's supposed to all come together for them. And it causes them to be holy, right? It causes them to be set apart and different and all these things. And so when we turn to Deuteronomy chapter 4,
So maybe,
go ahead.
okay, I love that analogy because I think you can talk about, the corner pieces being like the 4 parts of the Abrahamic promise, right? I'll make you a numerous people, right? I'll take you to this place, you have a privileged relationship, and you have this purpose. Got your 4 corners.
Right.
You still don't know what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
Until we get to this passage you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I like the 4 works really nicely.
There you go. I like that too.
I can steal that.
Well, and what I like about it too,
You're welcome.
but the way you frame it there, Sam, I think is great for people to understand because so often Christians are like, oh, that's just that law, Torah stuff, and God doesn't want us to be these law people anymore. And they don't understand that what God is trying to do with Israel is give them a vision of his original intention for humanity. Like God was like, I had a plan and I could see it for how people, as Adam and Eve would have children and build communities and how people would live together with each other and interact with the ground and with the animals and the plants. Like I could just see it all. And it was beautiful. I love this image that I could see. And sin came in and just wrecked it. And I want a people who are going to listen to me. I'm going to tell you what my original vision was. And you get to live out that vision so that people, as they pass through with their caravans or whatever, will see it and go, again, bunch of weirdos because they're not doing what we do, but they sure do make it look good.
Yeah. And I would even say, just continue your analogy.
But there's more. There's more of the analogy once we get through passages. It's fine.
Yeah. But like maybe this Exodus passage is like the other outside pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You get a shape of the box, but you
Yep.
still don't know what the inside is. You're just been able to connect it because they all have that flat edge on the
flat edge.
outside. So maybe this priestly calling, right? It's a priestly thing. Like you exist for other people. That's part of it. And it's going to have something to do with these commandments, but you still don't know what they look like.
Yep.
And then we get to your passage.
Okay, finally. Woo! Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 5. And just to sort of set it up, this is the new generation that's about to enter the promised land. Moses is sort of stating the covenant for this people. And he's kind of gone through their history. And then it culminates in chapter 4, verse 5 says, "See, just as the Lord my God has charged me, I now teach you statutes and ordinances for you to observe in the land that you are about to enter and occupy. You must observe them diligently. For this will show your wisdom." Sorry, I lost my place. "Your wisdom and discernment to the peoples, who, when they hear all these statutes, will say, 'Surely this great nation is a wise and discerning people.' For what other great nation has a God so near to it that the Lord our God is whenever we call to him? And what other great nation has statutes and ordinances just as this entire law that I am setting before you today?" And I love this passage.
I do
so
too. I
much.
love this
It's just so good because it's like, for the people who say keeping laws basically made them right with God or attain salvation, you're totally missing what Torah is about,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Torah is creating this people that are so unique and so different. People can't stop but say, what is their deal?
Yeah.
But not in a bad way,
Right.
but in like, that's fascinating. So you're telling me that you get a day off every week? Right? You're telling me that there's certain things you eat or don't eat because it's like, tell me more about that.
Yeah.
Like if you think about like evangelism, that's the best thing you can hear when you're talking to someone about Jesus. Like, tell me more. Like, yes, okay, we're getting somewhere. Like that's what this Deuteronomy passage is saying should happen.
Yeah.
And so now we've got the picture, right, of the jigsaw puzzle. We see what it's supposed to look like. That Torah has now filled in all these things, and so people look at it and say, "That is a cool picture. How'd you put that together?" And they have the opportunity to talk to them about Yahweh, about the covenant, about all these sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, these are people who are supposed to be living a life of blessedness. And on the one hand, it's God deliberately blessing them because, he promised to do that. He has a covenant relationship with them. But it's also because they're just listening. They're like, okay, the God who created everything told us how to do it. Let's do it that way. And people are like, wow, it really works. You don't have oppression. You don't have this, horrible divide between the haves and the have-nots. And everybody gets their land back every 50 years and debts are forgiven every 7 years. Man, that's really cool. And you're supposed to go, yes, we love living this way. And let's tell you how we got here. The creator of heaven and earth said, here's how I want you to live. And there should be just like this joy and enthusiasm that you are living this wonderful, blessed life that comes out as you're sharing with these people who are passing through your land.
Yeah, so you can go through the commands, the specific ones, like you think about the Ten Commandments, there is a people who are not coveting one another's land, animals, and wives.
Yeah.
There's a people who are honoring their parents.
Yeah.
Those are just all pieces of the picture, right?
Yeah.
This is a people that are not wondering, experimenting through trial and error. What do the gods want from me? And try and maybe if I sacrifice my kid, God will make it rain, or give me prosperity, or maybe if I do that, like, they're grasping for straws on what worship looks like, right?
Yeah.
And then God's like, here's the worship that I accept that is pleasing to me. These are all different pieces of the puzzle, all the laws of Torah, and then taken together is a compelling picture that people are drawn to.
Yeah, I mean, in a world where sin runs amok, there's a group of people who are not adding to it, right? That they are actually trying to reverse some of these things that sin has brought into the world. And I assume that would be pretty enticing, wouldn't it? And so, like, it's just such a, like, that's the picture of it, right? And I go further in the sermon. I say that would be amazing if you're trying to put together a puzzle, but they're all numbered. Like you don't have to do anything. You just put them in order of number. And like that's kind of like that's what their lives are. Like Torah is the picture, and their lives are. This is like simple by numbers. We'll go through and like put it all together, and it should make perfect sense for everyone. It's not some like insane IKEA 5,000 step program. It's like there it is, right in front of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked in our prep. There's kind of a passage we find in Zechariah that kind of depicts this in action a little bit. Gives a sense of these outsiders who are aware of God's set-apart people who have heard maybe about their blessing, who want in on what God's doing with them. So Zechariah 8:23 says, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, in those days," so this is days to come when people are drawn to Israel, right? "In those days, 10 men from nations of every language shall take hold of a Jew," I guess a single Jew, right? "Grasping his garment and saying, 'Let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you.'" I just love that image. It just takes that Deuteronomy passage from Deuteronomy 4 and says, this is what it looks like. You have such a compelling life that God's blessing is upon you, that you're embracing his ways. They're grabbing a hold of you because they want to hear about this God that they've seen at work in your life. And it's evangelism, but it's attractional.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
It's not really, it's not one man is going out and grabbing 10 Gentiles and shaking them and saying, what are you doing wrong? Right? It's going the other direction.
Well, this is like you probably learned like lifestyle evangelism is another, and like that's exactly what it is. But it's so compelling.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of like when you walk down the street, there's some people who stand out to you. Maybe it's their hair color or hairstyle, or like you can't stop but look at them. Like, what would that look like if that were what believers and followers were like?
Yeah.
Where it was just so standing out. And part of that is their dress and their hairstyles and things that we look at in Torah. And we're like, who cares whether you cut the corners or this and that? Like, who cares if you have mixed cloths or not? Well, guess what? You will stand out if you do these things, and it'll cause someone to pause and say, "Huh, what's your deal?" Or if you get a reputation, "Oh, you're one of those people. We hear amazing things about you," and they want to grab you and hear more. And it's a fabulous picture that's painted here in these passages.
And even like the mixed clothing thing, it's like, why don't you mix your clothes? Why don't you wear clothes of two different kinds of cloth? And you say, it's not because there's something wrong with that. That's not right or wrong. God's simply trying to teach us a lesson. We do it to remind ourselves of the things that God has taught us. If you understand the intention behind those laws, then you realize it's not oppressive. It's like, oh, I can't wear this certain clothing. You can tell people, look, you're a Gentile, you wear two, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with what you're doing. But God has commanded us to do this because it helps us to remember important things. And we love God. We love what he's teaching us so much that we're like, yeah, I kind of want to remember those every day. And so, again, it's not an oppressive rule, but it's one that liberates you because it helps you to explain to other people why you do the things that you do.
Reminds me of our episode we did with Branson Parler. We were talking about his book, Everybody's Story.
Oh, yeah.
Which is about myths about sex and marriage and stuff like that, and the gospel truth alternative. That's not the actual title, but that'll get you there if you're looking. But he has a section on, Christians living questionable lives.
Yeah.
Like that our sex practices, our commitments, they look different from the world. And and maybe they make the world uncomfortable and maybe convicted, but they get people asking questions.
Yeah.
And that's definitely seems to be how God, I guess at the heart of God's evangelistic strategy for the nations.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Where are we?
Well, we have all that. We're going to turn to the prophets who are going to continue this understanding. And I think what's fascinating about it is, depending upon where you put the prophets, it could be in the middle of living in the land. It could be in exile, right? The mission doesn't change, right? The mission doesn't stop. This is still what they're called to do, though the context may have changed.
Yeah. And so in Isaiah, in the latter part of Isaiah is written centuries after Moses was alive. God is reminding Israel of why they are in existence. In fact, like the subtitle for Isaiah 42 is "A Servant, a Light to the Nations," which I think is probably a good subtitle. Don't always love them, but this one I think it works. Because in verse 6, God says to them, "I am the Lord. I have called you in righteousness. I have taken you by the hand and kept you. I have given you as a covenant to the people, a light to the nations." And so that idea of Israel being a light to the nations really captures that idea of what we were saying here.
And there are two more passages we're going to read before we go into what that means.
So I forgot. We were going to just read through them and then. So,
Classic.
Yeah.
I know.
There are 3 Isaiah passages that hammer this same point home. So that's the first one. The second one is from chapter 49, and I'll start with verse 5. "And now the Lord says, who formed me in the womb to be his servant, to bring Jacob back to him, and that Israel might be gathered to him. For I am honored in the sight of the Lord, and my God has become my strength. He says, it is too light a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the survivors of Israel. I will give you as a light to the nations, that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth."
And then Isaiah chapter 60. I'm going to begin in verse 1. I could probably read the whole chapter, but I'm not going to. It says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples. But the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will appear over you. Nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn." And then it goes on and says you're going to be radiant. And anyway, a lot of light imagery in this chapter. Just continuing what we said with the other two passages.
So
All right, now we're on.
Bring it.
I know. I've already lost my train of thought because now I was like listening to you guys and my brain wandered.
Something about light and Jesus.
No, it is. It's because that idea of them being a light to the nations, they're going to see you. You're supposed to shine brightly into this dark world and darkness that has overtaken the world, the darkness of sin. And sin is just people not listening to God and going their own way. It's kind of like what you were saying, John, about like it's just like experimentation. Maybe this will work. We don't know, but we're going to give it a try. But it all comes from people just trying to do it their own way and being their own little gods. And God's light shines out to say, this is what the Creator has said. And we want the nations to see it so that they can come to us like moths to a flame and say, man, teach us. It's like that Zechariah passage. Teach us. It's working. We want to be like you and experiencing what you're experiencing. But that only happens if we, or them, the people of God, and obviously this applies to us as well, if we are living it out in such a way that people are kind of jealous of what we have. We should be really conspicuous in our lifestyle so that the world is just like, you are so weird, but I love it. Make me weird like you. That's a lot of what evangelism is.
Yeah. I mean, all these passages have this thing in common, and it's God's people exist for the nations, right? And there's a lot that they have to do in-house for that to be possible. And how they live from their communal life together is supposed to attract people to them. It's supposed to shine like a light. It's supposed to, penetrate into the darkness. And it's their set-apart way of life that does that, the set-apart way of life they've inherited from the Lord. But we don't have, really, in any of these passages, a kind of, now go out in twos, and go to Moab or go to Edom or go to Egypt or Babylon and, go tell people about the Lord, the God of Israel. There's really no passage like that.
Not in the Old Testament, no.
So I guess my question is why? Why do you suppose that's not happening here?
I think that, I don't know. I mean, I think of a couple things. First, that they are a people who I would suggest that this was probably written during the exile, at least. And so they're already scattered around the world at this point on some level. And so their ability to, well, depending upon which one we're talking about, but right, mine, we'll go with mine. And they don't need to go out because they're already out, right? And God, through the exile, has forced Israel into all parts of the world to be this holy, set apart people. And so for me, that's part of it for mine. I don't know. What do you think, Ron?
I think that God recognizes that he has to give them time to sort of grow up. That, and this is what Paul talks about in Galatians, that, you kind of have young Israel and they're like little kids. You got to kind of hem them in, it's like little kids. You got to put a fence around the yard because, you just want to keep them safe. And so for a time, God has them in this, sort of area of Israel because that's what I got to do for you to begin to grow up into the people that I want you to be. But with exile, they begin to move beyond that. God gives them this sort of opportunity to move out beyond their borders into the broader world, but to still maintain their covenant commitments to him. And so now they have matured a little bit, and God's giving this opportunity through exile to have have kind of a broader influence by living among the nations. Early on, as we see in books like Judges, they can barely live with the people who are their neighbors without falling away from God. By the time you get to exile, they're doing a much better job of maintaining their loyalty to God, not only within the confines of what was formerly Canaan, but in the broader world as well. It's like, good job. You've kind of learned your lesson. You're a mature people, and I can trust you now to live among the nations and not be corrupted by their idolatry and their variety of ways. I don't know if that's the whole explanation, but I think that's at least part of it.
Yeah, I find that compelling. Like, I feel like one of the greatest reasons God doesn't send them out is because they're not ready yet. Like, we've been talking about, even going back to the Exodus passage, like, if you keep my covenant, if you follow these ordinances, right, it's kind of conditional. Like, they live out these ways spelled out in Torah, and the nations are attracted. They live out this set-apart way of life, and the nations want to hear about their God. And that way that you're living is shining a light. So all of it, that mission is contingent upon the set-apart way of life actually reflecting God's design for Israel, that would be salt and light to the world. And if they're not living that way, if they've broken the covenant, which they have, right? I mean, Scripture is very clear about that, then there isn't a people worth sending out.
Yeah.
I want to say worth language is the wrong, maybe ready to be sent out, right? They're not ready. It's just like, you still don't get the set-apart way of life that I'm asking you to share with the nations. So until you get it yourself, I can't use you to share it with others. You can't take people where you haven't been.
Right.
And they haven't been there yet. And so part of what happens when they break the covenant is God's like, I got to strip you of everything because you're distracted. You've gone off course. You've embraced, nationhood like the nations, right? Yeah. And I need you to be a different kind of people before I can use you to bless the nations. And he takes everything away from them. And part of how the Old Testament ends is, and now you're broken down. And now you're not a shining light. Now you're a broken vessel, right? And days are coming when I renew the covenant with you, when I send the Messiah who will gather you, restore you, put my law on your hearts, and you'll really get it this time, right? It's that next step has to happen. The Messiah has to come. The covenant needs to be renewed. And then God can use them as this light to the nations. Because even these Isaiah passages we read, these are future tense. Yeah. The Zechariah passage we read, this is future tense. Yep. Precisely because it wasn't happening on the ground in Israel. Days are expected when it would happen. And it's after the law is written on your heart, right? It's after you embrace it, own it from the inside out. Then God can use you in this way. So I don't think it's there because I don't think his people are ready yet.
Yeah. It's like part of it is their reputation is supposed to precede them. But if they haven't built the reputation, right, if they don't have that, then it's not going to work. right?
Yeah. Exactly.
And so until they get to that point where they're known as this kind of people, this holy set apart people, the evangelism is not happening.
Yeah.
People aren't seeing this beautiful jigsaw puzzle that's put together. They're seeing a mess. And I don't want that.
A lot
I'm
of
good.
pieces and no box to
Yeah.
explain how it fits
Right.
together.
Yeah. Ooh. I think I know what image Darren is going to choose for the Facebook
I
post.
can only imagine.
Well, I think this sets us up nice for next time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, well, I'm not going to give a preview of it because I guess we've said enough. So
Indeed.
thank you for joining us for this episode of the After Class Podcast. After Class because
The best conversations happen
After class.